Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with random reviews of books on music from the Overflow Room Annex down here in the basement. There's so much stuff. I got all these books put away finally. All these boxes are packed up. Look at this. Oh, I'm so excited. All kinds of stuff here. Yeah. That we're going to be talking about for maybe the next 200 or 300 years. Actually, these are not my most popular videos. Most people aren't terribly interested in the books, and it's a crazy eclectic selection of them, I understand. But I just think it's so much fun to document what there is, what exists. And somewhere out there will be people who are interested in these topics. And I hope that they find these videos if they're doing their Google searches and whatnot. And through these videos that you have a chance to explore anything about music, any topic of music that interests you, because I've got pretty eclectic selection of them down here. So let's start. Let's see. Last video we were talking about Zoroastrianism. Well, not so much today. Today we're going to be talking about, we do have some history, some very serious and interesting history. But first, Berta Geissmar, who was Furtwängler's secretary in Germany, The Baton and the Jackboot. Her memoir of working with Furtwängler and what happened when the Nazis came to power, because she was Jewish and she had to leave Germany. And he got her out of Germany. He made sure that she got out of Germany. And she was a very well-educated, musically intelligent lady and was ideally placed to talk about what was going on. And it's a very, very serious and wonderful book. Again, it's called The Baton and the Jackboot by Berta Geissmar. She was a doctor of philosophy, obviously. Dr. Berta Geissmar was uniquely placed to observe the European musical scene in the first part of this century, for she was first secretary to the greatest German conductor, Wilhelm Furtwängler, and then invited to Britain to undertake similar responsibilities with Thomas Beecham. Those were times, regrettably, still with us, when the demands of dictatorship clashed bitterly with those of artistic freedom. Apart from being an intimate account of the many personalities she encountered, Dr. Geissmar's book poignantly and permanently illustrates the theme of creative integrity under threat. Really a fascinating study. Furtwängler does not emerge entirely unscathed in this particular book, but it's not really the point. The point is it's a historical narrative of what was going on at the time. I think that the importance of that narrative has been subsumed into the sort of more sensationalistic business about, was Furtwängler a Nazi? Wasn't he a Nazi? He was not a Nazi. He hated the Nazis. But he was unbelievably narcissistic and self-regarding and insecure, and convinced of his mission to safeguard German art, which allowed him to collaborate with the Nazis to a degree which was rather uncomfortable for him and which he rationalized in various ways. That's the reality. That is simply the reality. And, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's really a pretty simple issue. But Geissmar gives a really, really powerful description of what it was to actually be there on the ground when all of this stuff was going on. I originally read this book because it was part of my research for my first master's thesis at Johns Hopkins University back in 1983, when the topic was Der Fall Hindemith, the affair, the sensation caused by Furtwängler's performance of Hindemith's symphony Mattis der Maler, and the demonstrations in favor of Hindemith, which the Nazis took as an immediate challenge to their authority. And Furtwängler was dismissed from all of his musical posts. At the time, Hindemith was forced to leave Germany, ultimately, as a result of this whole thing. And so this was part of the background research I did for that. It's very, very interesting. So Berta Geissmar, The Baton and the Jackboot. Give it a read if you are really curious to know, the truth, or at least one version of the truth, someone who really was there to see what was happening. Then we've got, in a similar vein, The Nationalization of the Masses. This is one of the great books of German intellectual and cultural history. George L. Mosse came from a family of Holocaust survivors. He taught at the University of Wisconsin at Madison for many years. I knew him personally. I wanted to go and study with him for graduate work. I desperately wanted to go, and he wanted me to come and join him there. But he was ill, and he retired. He had to retire. It was the end of his career, the end of his life. He passed away a few years after that. He is one of the foremost authorities on the cultural history of the Nazi era and its origins. And this is an origin story. It's very, very interesting. Let me just read you the blurb here to tell you what's going on, and you'll see what I mean. German nationalism was transformed into a secular religion during the 19th century by a new form of politics, which moved in a world of myths, symbol, rites, and festivals. Ranging widely in the arts, philosophy, politics, and athletics, George L. Mosse traces the historical development of this secular religion and of the evolving forms of German mass politics in the 19th and 20th centuries, which were eventually to provide the essence of National Socialist politics. It's not long. This book, it's 250 pages or so, including the index, 215 pages without. And it's brilliantly researched and passionately argued by a historian who really, really had a grasp of his topic. He wrote several books, and most of his books are not that, they're not that long. It's a tremendous legacy. So if you're interested in this period and what was really going on and how, the Nazis came to power and, the German problem, the German question, that is how we talked about it when I was a historian back in those days. It was how could a country of such culture and such attainment devolve so quickly? And this book gives you one of the answers. So definitely recommend it highly. And then last but not least, okay, let's sort of, since we're on the subject of Nazis, we might as well wrap it all up. Richard Strauss, The Cambridge Companion, edited by Charles Yeomans. This is part of the research I did for my book on Richard Strauss's orchestral music and things like that. It was fun to write. It was so much fun to write and so interesting. Strauss was a fascinating character. He really was. And let's see what we have here. Background. This is a wonderful book to give you a sort of overview of Richard Strauss and his life. It's very different from Michael Kennedy's biography, which we talked about in the previous video, because it's a series of shorter essays. You can dip into it at will, and it takes a different approach because it deals with the angle that each of the essay writers it pursues. So you've got the musical world of Strauss's youth, his compositional process, maturity and indecision in the early works. Very interesting. There's some very interesting criticism here, too. Then we've got works. The first cycle of tone poems, the second cycle of tone poems, Strauss's road to operatic success, Guntram Feuersnot and Salome, the Strauss Hofmannsthal operas, opera after Hofmannsthal, and actually I like my songs best, Strauss's Lieder. It's a great disc. Perspectives. Strauss's Place in the 20th Century by Alex Ross, the wonderful critic for The New Yorker, and who wrote an amazing book about Wagner, and The Rest is Noise, and his blog is terrific. He's brilliant, so that's interesting. Musical quotations and allusions in the works of Strauss, Strauss in the Third Reich, Strauss and the Business of Music, which is very, very interesting, actually. Kapellmeister Strauss, Strauss and the Sexual Body, the erotics of humor, philosophy, and ego assertion. You got to have an essay about bullshit in any of these books you do, right? And Strauss and the Nature of Music, which is the conclusion. So a very beefy and fulfilling and interesting book about Richard Strauss. And we've dealt with, this was all stuff from roughly the same period, focusing on Germany, German music, the Nazi era, stuff that I was heavily involved in researching and studying back in the 80s, and it fascinates me still. And it may fascinate you too, at least I hope so. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.